Hello. Today I'd like to show you how to make a block using some 5-inch squares, and this is a Lemoyne Star lookalike. It's not quite the same as a Lemoyne Star in the traditional sense with the way it's cut and things, but it's something that looks pretty close, so I think we can get away with an almost Lemoyne Star. So starting out with some 5-inch squares, as far as I understand it, the Lemoyne Star is made of two colours that alternate around in the star shape. So I've got some 5-inch squares and I'm going to show you how I cut those. I'm just going to show you how I make a quarter of the block because I've already pre-made some of the rest of it to show you how to put the block together. So we'll just show you how to do that quarter. So starting with some 5-inch squares. Now I've got two colours here and I'm going to lay one on top of the other. They're cut to 5 inches square. I want to cut those in half so that I've got strips that are 2.5 inches wide by 5 inches long. So lining up with my board, I'm just cutting through the middle there so that it's cut quite in half. And so here I've got one of this colour and one of this colour. We'll work with those now. The other thing you need to have is some background. Here I've chosen to use a white background. So to make one block, you need to have 8 2.5-inch squares of the background, and you need to have 4 3 3/8 inch squares. Now we'll be cutting them in half, and I've already cut mine in half. They get cut diagonally in half, so 3 3/8 inch, and it's fairly important that it be that size for this block. So here I've got my strips. Now with my squares, I want to just quickly draw myself a diagonal line on the back side of these background squares. We're just going to do that. I've got a pencil here. And so I'm going to pop those on to my rectangles because we're just going to sew so that we can take off the corner. Now on the different colours they need to alternate which direction we're going to sew those on. So on this one here I'm coming down this way, and on this one I'm going to be sewing up the other way so that when they meet the points will meet there. So I'll quickly take that to the sewing machine. So we're going to sew right on that line. So straight up the middle there, and on this one we feed it in the other way because we're going in the other direction, but again sewing straight on that line. Just snip those apart. Now I'm going to take the corners off, so I'm just going to trim now 1/4 inch away from the seam because we're going to flip this back and we don't need this part here. So I'll just line up my ruler with a 1/4 inch line on the sewing line and cut 1/4 inch away from the sewn line. And the same thing on this one. And now I'm just going to grab the iron and I'm going to press that over that way. And the same with the other one, just pressing from the right side, just let that sit over nicely. And now I've got two pieces that when they're together are going to have, you can see how it's going to go together, it's going to meet quite nicely. So then I need to, this gets a little bit tricky now, we're going to be attaching our little corners here. So I'm just going to measure, using the markings on my ruler, I'm going to come in and find the 2-inch marking, and I'm going to lay that along where my seam is, where I've joined on, and I'm going to then trim off, so just lay that along the 2-inch, and I'm going to cut that 2 inches away. So we're just cutting that corner off. Now it doesn't go through the corner of this rectangle, it is to one side, so just remember that it's a little bit different than cutting just straight through a corner. So the same on this one, line up my 2-inch line right on my stitching line and trim off at that 2 inches away. And the same thing, I've got a funny little corner on here. So now I'm going to attach my half of my 3 3/8 inch square. Remember it was a square, we've cut that in half diagonally, and that actually now gets stitched on. One will go on there and one will come on this side of this one here. So I'll just get these done. So I'm going to flip that over so they're right sides together, and that's just going to overlap, but right where the 1/4 inch seam allowance comes through there. So we start at the top and come down. And same with the other one, flip that over. So that's on that short side that's still left there with this triangle sewn on. This looks a little bit fiddly, but what it gives us is a Lemoyne Star look-alike at the end of it. Just trim off my little threads there. And again, back to the iron, I'm going to press these. Now I'm going to press one of them into the background fabric, and the other one I'm going to actually press into the coloured fabric. And you'll see why in a minute, because these seams are going to be joining themselves together. So we've got these bits, and you kind of think they're going to go like that. Well, they could go like that, but we're actually going to put them together like this to give us a corner of the block. I've already made a corner here, you can see, so I'm just going to make another corner now. So now I'm going to join those together, and because we press these seams in opposite directions, when we do this seam, which is a diagonal seam, so we have to be a little bit careful when the fabric's on the diagonal because it wants to be a little bit more stretchy, then it just helps to be able to butt those seams together. So now I'm back to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew from this end right up to the point. So this is a diagonal bias seam, remember, just be careful that your fabric doesn't stretch as you sew. So just let it feed in nicely. Just using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now, because that seam's got these little bits and pieces, I'm actually going to press that seam open. I don't often press seams open, but just occasionally things sit a little bit better if we do that. So to press it open, you've got to lay it down, and I often just run my finger along first before I actually take the iron to it, just to make sure it's sitting nice and flat and is a bit easier to iron. So I'm just pressing that seam open, and you'll find that you'll get a nice flat sitting triangle or 1/4 of our block. So I've actually already done, as I showed you before, 1/4. So now when we're going to make the block up, I've actually already joined 2 other quarters together to make a half. So these 2 quarters now will go together, so right sides together and straight down this seam to the middle. So this is kind of a fun block. It's nice with 2 colours. I have also made it with different colours, and I'll show you one of those shortly. So I've joined those together. Now I'm actually pressing that seam to one side, so that again when we join it together the seams will meet and be able to snuggle against each other rather than trying to press everything open, because we've got to be a little bit careful with our centre point, making sure that all meets nicely. So now I've got my 2 halves and my seams are going in opposite directions, so when I pop those 2 right sides together, those seams will just snuggle against each other nicely there. So now we need to do this seam. Now just keep an eye that your seams are meeting when you're sewing your seam. And just keep an eye on this middle bit, that it's sitting nicely. So I don't know much about the history of this block. It just looked like a nice block, and I just thought it would be quite fun to try and work it out with some 5-inch squares. And then again I've pressed this final seam that's all meeting nicely in the middle, and now I'm going to press this seam open as well, because we've got quite a lot of bulk sitting in here. We need to get that settled down a little bit so that we don't get a funny bump in the middle of the block. So just press that open. And that's looking pretty good. And there we have done a Lemoyne look-alike. Now, the reason I say it's not quite the same as the Lemoyne Star, it would have been cut traditionally from a diamond, and these are not actually quite parallel, these sort of corners. So it is very similar, but not an exact Lemoyne Star. So I think you could get away with it unless somebody was really getting out with a tape measure. And so I've actually just made a couple of blocks so that you could see they might be sashed, they might be popped together, but I've used the same colours so that you can just get a bit of an idea. Slightly different fabrics but same colours. And then I have made also another block using all different colours, just with a plain background, and I thought that was quite fun to do just as a star block as well. So starting with some 5-inch squares and a plain background and some squares, that really hasn't been too hard. Thank you.